linguistic philosophy in education. Linguistic philosophy is the view that many or all philosophical problems can be solved or dissolved by paying closer attention to language, either by reforming language or by understanding the everyday language that we presently use better. As we all know, language is everywhere. In old books and new words, in a long conversation with a friend and a short chat with a stranger, then the streams in our social media feeds. Language spans our whole lives, from one of the first things we encounter as babies to our famous last words. Language is what I'm doing right now. We can observe and study how language works like any other natural phenomenon, and that's linguistics. Linguists try to understand the big picture. How does language work in general? What is going on in our minds and our societies that allows every group of humans to have language spoken or signed? And why do each of us use language slightly differently? Linguistics is a study of language, but we're already using language right now. So let's back up a second. What do we mean by studying language? Here's an example.
Let's pretend I'm on a trip to another country. The sun is shining, and I'm enjoying some time in a place where I don't know anyone and I don't speak the language. Then I meet another person walking along, and while we're both admiring the flowers, a rabbit hops into view. The person points at the hopping rabbit and says, "Gavagai." So I think that must be the word in this person's language for rabbit. If I reply with rabbit, we could both learn something. But maybe that's not exactly what the other person meant. Does Gavagai mean rabbit? Maybe it just means fuzzy animal, or hopping, or just, hey look, or even, as the linguistic philosopher W.V. Quine proposed, lo, an undetached rabbit part. Or maybe this particular rabbit's name is Gavagai. I could ask, but I don't speak the language yet. And figuring out how to ask these complex ideas requires us to know some more basic, concrete words. Like rabbit, which is what we're trying to figure out in the first place. We need to get out of this loop. Let's start by making some tentative assumptions, but we'll stay prepared for some of them to be wrong. I'll smile, point at the hopping bunny, and say rabbit. At least I'm indicating a desire to communicate, even though neither of us can be sure exactly what the other person is trying to say. As I walk with my new friend, pointing at animals and sharing words, both of us can test and refine our initial linguistic hypotheses. Maybe we encounter some baby rabbits, and I learn that they're not called Gavagai. So I can update my mental entry for Gavagai to fully grown rabbit ? Maybe I'll realize something about English that I hadn't noticed before when I try to explain it, like the subtle difference between rabbit and bunny.
As we just saw, language is a unique area to study because we need to use it to study it. On the one hand, this means that we can do a lot of linguistics without needing fancy equipment because language is there right in our brains and the people around us. Now the question is, what makes language a language? How it is developed? And eventually, what creates its meaning? Today, we are going to look into the fundamental philosophy of linguistics.
Now, let's get to know some of the philosophers behind linguistic philosophy. First, we have Hans Georg Gadamer. He was a German philosopher who was considered as the most important philosophers of the post-1945 era. He said that nothing exists except through language, which means that without language, everything is meaningless. Without language, we cannot communicate or be nourished by ideas, and it will not be that easy for us to understand what is happening around. Next, we have Friedrich Ludwig Gottlob Frege. He was a German philosopher, logician, and mathematician. He invented the groundbreaking philosophical theory of meaning, which includes his influential distinction between the reference and its sense. So the reference of an expression is often a thing or person in the world, while the sense of an expression is not a thing at all. It is an abstraction that can be entertained in the mind of an English user. Lastly, we have Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century, and he revolutionized the way that we understand language through his picture theory of meaning, which states that the function of thought is therefore to allow us to picture things. However, Wittgenstein had decided that the picture theory language was quite wrong. Wittgenstein's shift in thinking maps the general shift in 20th century philosophy. For him, creating a meaningful statement is not a matter of mapping the logical form of the world. It is a matter of using conventionally defined terms within language games that we play out in the course of everyday life. He took a step back and argued that the world we see is defined and given meaning by the world we choose, and that reality is shaped by the words we use. In short, the world is what we make of it. Now that we know some of the philosophers of linguistic philosophy, let's now tackle the purpose of linguistic philosophy. Why do we need to teach it, what to teach, and how do we teach it?
The purpose of linguistic philosophy is that linguistics helps us understand our world. Every language is like a one-of-a-kind species. It captures unique conceptualizations of the world and has its own ways of constructing words, phrases, and sentences for communication ideas. Linguistics helps us empower because language captures how we perceive the world around us and how we relate to one another. It defines who we are. Linguistics helps fight poverty. Why teach about linguistic philosophy? So, with teaching linguistic philosophy, it is about to develop the communication skills of the learner because the ability to articulate, to voice out the meaning and values of things that one obtains from his or her experience of life and the world is the very essence of man. So, when we say articulate, it is about showing or expressing your thoughts or ideas clearly and effectively, especially in exchanging conversation with other people, and through it, you will be able to speak. Next is to develop in the learner the skill to send messages clearly and receive messages correctly. So, all throughout learning linguistic philosophy, the learner will be able to develop or express his or her thoughts and ideas in the right manner and then apprehend or understand the messages. Next is what to teach. In here, learners should be taught and communicate clearly, like how to send clear, concise messages and how to receive correctly and then understand messages that are sent. And so communication takes place in three ways, which is through verbal, non-verbal, and then paraverbal. So these three are also called the three components of communication. There is need to teach learners to use language that is correct, precise, grammatical, coherent, and accurate so that they are able to communicate clearly and precisely their thoughts, ideas, and feelings. So next is that there is need to caution the learners of the verbal and non-verbal barriers to communication. Like learners must be mindful of how they communicate, like they must be clear enough in using verbal and non-verbal in order for the person understand. And the next is teach them to speak as many languages as you can. The more language one speaks, the better he or she can communicate with the world. So, as a learner or as future educator, we must broaden the knowledge of the learners by teaching them many languages as we can. Because teaching them many languages can be a great help of them in order to understand people despite being diverse. Next is how to teach. So the most effective way to teach a language and communication is through experiential way. As what others says, experience is the best teacher because through experiencing, socializing, or exchanging conversation to people, it helps ourselves in enhancing our communication skills and moreover, it nurtures and develops more our ability to communicate. Next is teacher should make the classroom a place for the interplay of minds and hearts. In order for the learners to sharpen their minds in terms of thinking, especially sharing their thoughts and ideas. And lastly, a teacher must facilitate dialogue among learners between his or her students because in the exchange of words, there is also an exchange of ideas. So I guess that's all. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I am Marimar Perez, and I am here to discuss one of the philosophy in education, and that is constructivism. So, what is constructivism? Constructivism is basically a theory based on observation and scientific study about how people learn. It says that people construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiencing things and reflecting on those experiences. So when we encounter something new, we have to reconcile it with our previous ideas and experience, maybe changing what we believe or maybe discarding the new information as irrelevant. In any case, we are active essential components to constructivist teaching. So according to Vavitskar-Halter and Whitney 2009, there are several main components to include if you plan on adhering to constructivist principle in your classroom or when designing your lessons. First is elicit prior knowledge. New knowledge is created in the relation to learners' pre-existing knowledge. Lessons, therefore, require eliciting relevant prior knowledge. Activities include pre-test, informal interviews, and small group warm-up activities. Second is create cognitive dissonance. Assign problems and activities that will challenge students. Knowledge is built as learners encounter novel problems and revise existing schemas as they work through the challenging problem. Third is apply knowledge with feedback. Encourage students to evaluate new information and modify existing knowledge. Activities should allow for students to compare pre-existing schema to the novel situations. Activities might include presentations, small group or class discussion, and quizzes. Lastly is reflect on learning. Provide students with an opportunity to show you and themselves what they have learned. Activities might include presentations, reflexive papers, or creating a step-by-step tutorial for another student.
Now, let's tackle philosopher behind constructivism, which is Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget is the philosopher from Switzerland, a natural scientist famous for his work on child development, a genetic epistemology, cognitive development, and epistemological view. One of his famous quotes is that the principal goal of the education should be creating men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. Piaget's theory of constructivism argues that people produce knowledge and form meaning based upon their experiences. Two of the key components which create the construction of an individual's new knowledge are accommodation and assimilation. For instance, when the child saw a cow for the first time, she will assimilate her schema of donkey as four-legged animal. When the mother told her that it is a cow, she will accommodate this new information and will refer to that animal as cow and not doggy. The child will learn that not all four-legged animal is called doggy. Assimilating causes an individual to incorporate new experiences into the old experiences. This causes the individual to develop new outlooks, rethink what were once misunderstandings, and evaluate what is important, ultimately altering their perception. For instance, when a child first sees a Dalmatian dog, the child will interpret this information based on his or her existing mental frameworks and will label it doggy, because on the child's mind, All animals that have four legs is dog. Accommodation, on the other hand, is reframing the world and new experiences into the mental capacity already present. Individuals conceive a particular fashion in which the world operates. When things do not operate within that context, they must accommodate and reframing the expectation with the outcomes. Apart from learning theories, Piaget's theory of constructivism addresses how learning actually occurs, not focusing on what influences learning. The role of the teachers is very important. Instead of giving a lecture, the teachers in this theory function as facilitators whose role is to aid the student when it comes to their own understandings. This takes away focus from the teacher and lecturer and puts it upon the students and their learning. The resources and their lesson plans that must be initiated for this learning theory takes a very different approach toward traditional learning as well. Instead of telling, the teacher must begin asking. Instead of answering questions that only align with their curriculum, the facilitator in this case must make it so that the student comes to the conclusion on their own instead of being told. Also, teachers are continually in conversation with the students, creating the learning experience that is open to new directions depending upon the needs of the students as the learning progresses. Teachers following Piaget's theory of constructivism must challenge the students by making them effective critical thinkers and not being merely a teacher but also a mentor, a consultant, and a coach.
So why teach constructivism? The central idea of constructivism is that human learning is constructed, that learners build new knowledge upon the foundation of previous learning. Hence, we need to develop intrinsically motivated and independent learners who can construct knowledge and make meaning of it. What to teach? All knowledge is socially constructed. Learning is a social activity. It is something we do together and an interaction with each other. That's why we need to teach them to learn some processes and skills like searching, evaluating, critiquing, questioning, and constructing new knowledge. How to teach? The teacher here will act as a facilitator of learning who will provide ideas from the student's mind with data or experiences that allow them to hypothesize, manipulate objects, or invent. The teacher makes sure that he or she understands the student's pre-existing conceptions and guides the activity to address them and then build on them. Learners will be constantly trying to develop their own individual mental model of the real world from their perceptions of that world. As they perceive new experiences, learners will continually update their own mental models to reflect the new information and will therefore construct their interpretation of reality.